Hello, this is Heather Hoffman. Today I'm sharing a couple of cards for Pinkfresh Studio using lots of different stamps, dies, and some of Pinkfresh's beautiful new liquid watercolors. I'm starting off with a couple of background dies, the Geo Leaf background and Geo Floral background. And I'm going to use these with some white embossing paste and Pinkfresh's watercolors to tint the embossing paste. I've already die cut each of these panels out of just plain old white cardstock, 110-pound Neenah Solar White, and I've cut some separate panels of the same white cardstock, just slightly smaller than an A2 card base, which is also slightly smaller than my background die that I've cut. And then a tiny bit of Post-it tape. I'm going to attach it to the back with that just so nothing moves. But it'll peel off easily, and having that panel a little smaller works really well for that. And I'm going to scoop out a little bit of embossing paste, and I always tend to just separate it a little bit in case I have too much, then I haven't added too much color, but you'll see in a little bit I underestimated. I also always seem to do that. So I add a little dot of the liquid watercolor. I'm starting off with key lime for this one, and it's kind of fun and therapeutic mixing together. I feel like I'm playing with frosting, and it's so fun to watch the colors blend out. I ended up using all of that white to get a nice soft green, spring green kind of color, and I'm going to blend that just roughly on the top third of that panel, and then I'm going to blend in a little more of the green just to get a slightly darker color, and just keep going until I'm happy, adding a little bit more color. You can see how that's just a slightly darker shade, but not anything hugely noticeable. And then I'm going to come back in. I ran out of my white embossing paste, so I pulled a separate palette knife so I didn't ruin my embossing paste and get it all colored. And a little more of that key lime watercolors, and keep mixing that again until I get the color that I'm looking for. Again, just a little bit darker. And once I spread on the bottom, I decided I wanted just a little more deep color down there, so I went back in and just darkened up a little bit more with a little bit more of that watercolor. These watercolors, because they're liquid, it's really easy to drop them in, and they work beautifully for just tinting this embossing paste. Now I peel that panel off, and you can see that ombre effect and how well that worked just to make a stencil with that. All right, now I'm going to repeat that whole process again. For the second card, this time I'm using aquamarine for my watercolor to tint it, and the last card panel used Geo Leaf background. For this one I'm using the Geo Floral background, and I learned from my last mistakes, and I'm going to pull out a little more embossing paste this time, so hopefully I'll have enough. Last time I was a little too sparing and had to get a little more out, but in between, I just use a wet baby wipe to clean up. I kind of skipped that part because I figured you didn't need to see me sit and clean up, but it cleans off really easily. Make sure and do it fairly quickly, though, especially on your palette knife, because once this hardens, it's really tough to get it off. I've kind of learned that I have some little stained dark spots. So again, I went with the lightest color at the top, blended a little more in, and then came back with a little more of the aquamarine watercolor just to deepen that color at the very bottom, just to get a little darker shade. And you can see I also grabbed a little dab more of the watercolor at the very, very bottom. And then I'm going to do the same thing, kind of skipping over the part where I clean that up real fast, and then peel that panel off. And if you have any little stray spots of embossing paste, just clean them off now with your finger, or a baby wipe works really easily. All right, now for the front panel, I'm using Bloom, one of the beautiful new release stamps, and I've already stamped it using my Misty on watercolor cardstock. And in a few minutes, I'm going to die cut it with the dies. I'm not going to do it here, but I just had to show you the way the dies now come with a magnet in there, so it holds on to the panel, which is really handy for storing. And I'm going to pull out some more of those liquid watercolors. I'm just using a filled water brush. You can use any kind of brush you want. That's just something I use a lot, and I'm really happy and comfortable with it. So I'm pulling out for one set of the flowers. I'm going to color the florals with Sunshine and Clementine. The other floral I'm going to color with Bubblegum. And I'm adding at the end, just to blend, a tiny, tiny, tiny dot of the aquamarine into a bit of the pink, and it'll make just a really pale purple. That'll be my second shade on that floral. And then I'm using Emerald City for the leaves, and I end up coming in with a little bit of sapphire just to add a little bit of a blue and a little more of that aquamarine blended in for part of the shading. So I've sped this up so you can just sit and watch me color, but basically I come in with a nice pale color of my base shade, which on this one is the yellow. Add just a little tiny bit in, then come in and blend a little of the yellow and orange together and add a little shading and depth. I like to do it while it's still wet, so it just kind of blends out and you don't get any harsh lines. You can always wait till it dries and come back and add more shading. I love the way these blend. These liquid watercolors are so easy to use and they blend together so beautifully. And I love this floral image as well. It's a nice detailed, pretty image. So I did use my Misty so I could stamp it with Versamark ink, which is a good waterproof ink. I managed to finagle just right. I have pre-cut panels of Ranger watercolor paper, and I managed to fit both of my pieces on there so I didn't have to pull out a new sheet of paper. And I still had room to die cut around that when I'm done, which is really nice. So you can see that I've done the leaves, I've done the florals, and I'm coming around, and that's when I added that little bit of blue just to kind of hit some of the other florals with kind of a blue-green color. Again, these colors just blend so beautifully. This yellow flower I'm going to place on my aquamarine background, and the pink one I end up placing on my key lime background. So again, just like last time, I'm coming in, you can see with the pink, get that all shaded, and then that's where that little bit of aquamarine to get some purple, and then I go back over it again with a little bit more pink. And I've played with, again, I really like using a water brush. I know a lot of people prefer an ordinary brush and feel like they have more control. Not all water brushes work the same. I really like these ones that I found, and again, I've just gotten used to using them. I think when I travel, I like to take watercolors with me sometimes when I'm on the road. My oldest daughter started driver's ed and has been driving, so sometimes I'm in the back seat and I'll bring something to watercolor, and a water brush is really convenient. I like to use a wet wipe to clean it off in between colors, which makes a really nice, quick way to clean it off so you don't end up with the colors getting mixed. And I'm just about done with this. Once finished coloring, I'm going to set it aside to dry really thoroughly, and then I die cut with the coordinating dies so that I could place it on my card and start working on the sentiments. That's the next step. And I'm going to use sentiments from that same stamp set that I used for the florals, and also pair it up with a bigger sentiment, or a smaller sentiment, I'm sorry, from Let's Flamingle, which is from a previous release. I'm going to use the two large sentiments there, and then the two little ones there on the Let's Flamingle. I'm going to heat emboss these. I'm starting off with the larger ones on a strip of black cardstock. I like to keep it the width of an A2 card and just keep a strip to keep working up. And I use my embossing buddy at the bottom, and then my embossing pad. Ignore how dirty it is. It still stamps fine. I just managed to stain it really quickly. Stamp there at the bottom. Sprinkle my white embossing powder over there. And then, just to streamline, since I know the other sentiment I'm stamping, before I heat emboss, I just went ahead and turned around and used the other end of this, and that's where I stamped my congrats. I forgot to use my embossing buddy on this, but fortunately I must not have had any static or fingerprints on it, because this part worked just fine, even without the embossing buddy to keep things from sticking. So now I've got one at both ends, and I'll quickly pull out my embossing gun and heat set those. And once they've melted, which happens pretty quickly, then I'll pull out my paper trimmer, and then I can quickly trim these off in nice even strips. And then I set that black panel aside, and then I can use it again next time I need a thin sentiment strip of any kind. So if you know your paper trimmer really well, this is an easy way to line them up and make sure you have them even, instead of pre-cutting the strips and trying to heat emboss. And it's easier to hold on to a bigger piece as well. Alright, so I'm going to place those on there. I played a little with how I wanted to put them on. In the end, I ended up popping them up with foam adhesive. But I'm just placing them on there for now. And then I'm going to add my tiny sentiments from Let's Flamingle. And for these, I ended up heat embossing them in clear on a little bit of watercolor cardstock. And what this allowed me to do here in a few minutes, I'll show you, is make my sentiment be custom colored to perfectly match my background. So I'll heat emboss those in clear. It's really hard to see on the camera, so you probably won't be able to see. And I notice I inset it a little bit from the edge, and you'll see why I did that here in a few minutes. when I add the color. So again, it's kind of invisible now. I'm going to pull out my clear embossing powder, and then I'll do the same thing where I sprinkle it on and heat set it. And you won't be able to see anything because clear is so hard to see on the camera. I don't know, maybe you'll see a little bit of a reflection there. My heat gun's still hot, so that makes it work really quickly as well. All right, now here's how I'm going to get my custom colored sentiments. I am going to pull out those liquid watercolors again and my water brush, and I'll use the same couple colors. I kind of was trying to make up my mind which colors. At first I was going to use the pink, and then I decided to make them match my background. But I'm going to come over them with my water brush and a nice good solid color coating of the color, and just scribble over that, and you notice the heat embossing resists the watercolor. And once it's dried, I'll set it aside. Then I pulled out either a dry cloth, or I'd like to use a damp baby wipe. Just don't wipe too hard or you'll rub off the watercolors. But this will pull off any color that might have clung to the sentiments where it's resisted the color. And now you have a nice clean sentiment. And I'm going to do the same thing, only trim off the extra on both sides to make a nice thin sentiment. And look at that, the color is perfect and it matches my background just the way that I wanted it to. I love how fun that works together. So I've got those trimmed down to little pieces, and then I'm going to go ahead and assemble everything. I ended up attaching the florals with liquid adhesive Ranger Multi-Matte. That worked really well over the embossing paste to hold it sturdy in place. And then I attached those black strips with foam adhesive, and the little thin ones with thinner strips of foam adhesive kind of tucked over the bottom of the black, and finished off by mounting the entire panel on a white card base. Thanks so much for coming by. Hope you enjoyed. Have a wonderful day.